your soulmate expert and Asian matchmaker. Welcome to tonight's episode of Matchmaker Secrets, where we talk about love, dating, and relationships, and of course, matchmaking. So, time and again, we have always been wondering how come, in some situations, there has been some disconnect in our relationships. And sometimes okay, wow, boom, it just happened that, there's a disconnect and we're confronted by it. So, surprise, surprise. So, our guest today, Dr. Angela Derrick, is a licensed psychologist, co-owner of SpringSource Psychological Center, and actually a consulting faculty member at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. She specializes in the treatment of mood, anxiety, eating disorders, and relationship concerns, and is a certified eating disorder specialist and supervisor through the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals. So hello, doctor, how are you?
Hey, I'm well, thank you for having me today.
Yes, so I'm so excited. So, doctor, let's get right through the conversation over here. So what are the common signs that you have heard from your clients that clearly identify that a couple's relationship is disconnected?
Mm-hmm. Well, we can hear this a lot because it's not uncommon, actually, that couples go through kind of ups and downs in their relationship. But the kinds of things I hear are kind of less empathy for the other person, more frustration, more irritability, perhaps pointing to some larger issues sort of underneath that aren't being discussed or addressed. We can hear a lot about focus on superficial issues, right? What's the schedule for the day? What are the kids doing, right? What are the household responsibilities? And sort of less time and attention to the things that are more meaningful and connecting to the couple. And actually, Laura, I wanted to tell you about the Gottman Institute. They've done some interesting research on what are communication styles that are predictive of a relationship coming to an end. Right, so these would be things to look for in couples that are feeling disconnected. So the first one is criticism. If there's a lot of criticism in the duo, then that is certainly a predictor. The next is contempt. So that's sarcasm, making fun of your partner, belittling, right? The next one is defensiveness. So if someone is not open to hearing feedback, right? And then the last one is stonewalling, when there is distance and a kind of a stepping back and a guardedness in the couple. So any of these, any one to happen occasionally is not of concern, but if this is a regular part of your relationship, then these certainly are red flags.
Yeah. So I understand, those kind of situations that you have mentioned usually happens as well to long-term relationships. But I'm sure, it has also happened with, those who are just starting. And so, they don't have any clue.
Right. Well, and that's what I really find is an important topic of conversation in therapy, right? So my clients that are starting new relationships will come in and I'll say, great, thanks for bringing this into the session. Let's talk about what you're noticing. How are you feeling? How is that person treating you? How is that person treating other people in their lives, right? How do they talk about their family? How do they talk about their past relationships? Those are predictive of how they're going to treat you, right? I talk about the right boundaries, right? We don't want to rush into anything too quickly, but we also don't want to be so guarded that we can't get to know somebody, right? And just, are there any kind of red flags or things that aren't making you feel good about yourself right away? Right, so I think all those are important questions to be asking, like you said, even after date number 1 or 2.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then, I like that you pointed out, how do they actually relate to their family actually symbolizes how they're going to be treated as well, right?
Oh, it's so true. In fact, it's a pretty big predictor, right? The relationship that someone has with other people in their lives is often very telling of the relationship they're going to have with you, right? And so I like to hear my clients say, oh, he's got a great relationship with his mom, and he speaks so highly of the people that he's dated in the past. I think, okay, that's a good sign.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just curious now, where do you draw the line if the person is a mama's boy?
Well, right. That's another issue. I think we're looking for boundaries, right? So I would like to hear that the person respects their mother, enjoys seeing their mother, but has their own ideas about how they handle their lives, right? Isn't controlled by the mother, isn't enmeshed with the mother. So, Lori, boundaries are clearly, we're going to probably talk about that a lot today.
Yeah,
Boundaries
because
are
like, you
important.
know, there's some cultures, you know, wherein mother is so, you know,
yeah,
special to
yeah.
them. Like, you know, I've heard that to
Sure.
Italians and even I think like those Hispanic backgrounds. So like, yeah, that's the
Sure.
reason why I just thought about,
No,
okay.
it's a great question. I love that sort of cultural consideration of it because it's certainly normal and expected and really a good thing. There's just always an and, right? Is your partner able to also be separate, right? Close, but also separate.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what possible solutions do you usually offer to those couples wherein one of the partners is feeling unheard and misunderstood?
Well, first of all, I mean, a relationship is a lot of work, right? Whether you just met somebody or whether you've been with somebody for a long time. And oftentimes couples sort of expect, like, if you meet the right person, it's just going to be easy. And I was like, well, maybe at first, you know, when you're sort of infatuated and everything feels good. But relationships are hard. You know, we would expect to work on a relationship with our parents, with our children, with our colleagues. So of course we should expect to work on a relationship with our intimate partner, right? Maybe even that's the relationship that you'd want to put the most time and attention into. So I'm not hesitant to recommend couples therapy. And some clients will say to me, oh my gosh, you must really think I'm in trouble. If you recommended couples therapy, or I've only been dating this person for a year, what are you talking about? You know, we're not in trouble. And I say, no, it's important to set aside time on a weekly basis, to talk with your partner in a safe space where there's an objective third party so that you can do things like practice communicating, practice learning these tools that are going to be helpful to you your whole relationship, right? And oftentimes we bring our own stories into the couple, right? So we have our own history, our own background, our own childhood wounds. And if we don't figure out what those are and work on them, when we come into a couple, these can really activate and cause a lot of pain and distress, right? So in a couples therapy session, you can kind of talk about, hey, is that some of your old stuff that's impacting the couple, and how do we deal with that sensitively together?
Yeah.
There's one other piece of that I wanted to add, which is what I advise couples, maybe even those that aren't quite ready for couples therapy or aren't able to do it for some reason. There's this dynamic that couples get into where, let's say there's a disagreement of some kind. One part of the couple will kind of get entrenched over here with their opinion, which kind of forces the other person to come over here and get entrenched in theirs, right? And so you see a lot of couples that are just so stuck, right, and have difficulty seeing the other person's point of view. And these can really be couples that are disconnected somehow, right? What it takes is one of the members of the couple to be able to move a little bit closer to the middle and say, I don't necessarily agree with you, but I understand. I can see where you're coming from, and I can appreciate your point of view. Now, we're scared to do that sometimes because we think if we give in, then we're going to lose our position. But what actually happens then is that the other person softens a bit and is able to then say, I see you too. I understand your point of view too. Then we can get to work, right? When two people are in their own corners, you know, there's no communication, there's complete disconnection. So I like to talk to couples about that because I feel like that gives them a framework to understand, okay, me being empathic doesn't mean that I'm not going to get what I want, right? It's just a vehicle to be able to talk about things more constructively. Yeah.
And so what you call that, based on your experience, is it always the woman who's always encouraging the couple to like, oh, let's go to therapy?
Oh, well, I would say it leans that way, although not always. I do talk to couples about, there's usually someone in the relationship, from my experience, that's a bit more of the emotional caretaker, the one that kind of checks in, takes the temperature and goes, hey, we need to work on something. It doesn't mean the other person isn't willing and ready to do that, but usually somebody does kind of take that role almost. And you know, that happens in same gender couples obviously as well, and so it isn't always just kind of the woman versus the man in terms of kind of leading that charge. You know? Yeah.
I'm curious now, have you ever had a chance where in the main disconnect is politics?
Oh boy, that's a tough one, Lori. It really is. You know, generally speaking, I would say that the couples that I've had that have come to realize that they have different views have done this, have found a way to try to be empathic with each other, like we talked about earlier, right? So they don't get into finger pointing or how could you feel this way or what's the matter with you, you know, some of this like awful rhetoric we hear in our world day to day now. But there's like again, they don't have to agree, but they can understand and they can hold different beliefs within the context of the relationship, which is really lovely when that can happen. Hard to do, right? For some people, you know, other people that we might see, that's a no-go, that they feel that it's important in their relationship, that really aligned on that level, on a political, social level, that's an important piece of their relationship. So there are couples that like that as well.
So it draws down back to their what are their values, right? So like, you know, you have to think about it first, and then like, are you willing to go that route just in case you're going to be together?
Right. Well, you might go on a first date with someone, right, and hear that they disagree with you politically, let's say. And so you're kind of I would recommend if I was seeing a client, I would say, well, what did that bring up in you? How is that for you to hear? Did you feel like you could be honest about your feelings about that? And also, was the other person able to talk in a way that was respectful, that appreciated your point of view, right? It's sort of less about the content and more about how do we talk about things, right? So you and I might disagree vehemently about something, but if I respect you and I'm able to sit down and say, you know, hey, let's kind of hear a little bit more about what each of us are feeling and why, and what in our backgrounds, you know, leads us to this moment to feel the way we do. That's more meaningful, oftentimes, than like whatever the topic is.
Yeah,
right.
I like that, you know, you give respect to the other person, like, you know, what do they actually think about, you know, especially now that there's always a lot of contradictions, even like, you know, that abortion thing, and so like it's been crazy, and it's weird. So do you have a healthy practice you teach on how to fight, you know, and have an argument?
It's a great question because couples should be disagreeing, right? I get worried about the couples that say, we never have an argument, we don't disagree about anything. It's like, that's probably not true, but probably what is happening is that you're kind of pushing things down or sweeping them under the rug, right? Of course you're going to have disagreement. That's a part of life, right? So not something to be feared. But I do think it's important to be really intentional about your disagreements. So you don't want to be tired, you don't want to be at the end of a long day, you don't want either partner to be using substances, right? You want everybody to be clear, focused, wise-minded, able to participate in the conversation, and then to be able to speak kind of like I'm speaking now, in a respectful tone, in a kind of slow and kind and patient tone, because we don't want to activate the other person. So if I come at you and I'm elevated and I'm talking like this, Lori, you know, automatically your brain starts to kind of fight or flight, right? You're going to feel threatened and you're going to go into some kind of defensive mode just to protect yourself, right? So when both members of the couple are doing this, all of a sudden our brains are offline, our thinking, wise-minded brains are offline, and we're just trying to survive. Right, so it's not effective at all. So that's why we're not just talking in low, quiet, respectful tones because it's a nice thing to do. We're talking about it because it literally keeps our brains available for this type of, you know, higher order conversation. I ask couples to think about what is the one thing that we're focusing on right now. A conversation can get really hijacked when someone's like, and then you did this, right? And then, all of a sudden it's like, well, where can you possibly go at that point? And then another thing I recommend is be really careful not to use, you know, you always, you never. These sort of statements automatically create some anger in the other person and defensiveness, understandably. And they're also just not true, right? Nobody always or never does something. And so they're unkind and they're unfair and they're unproductive, right? So these are kind of some just basic ground rules. Again, it doesn't even matter so much, I said this before, what we're saying. It does matter, but I think it matters even more how we say it, right? The process of how we say it.
Yeah.
and how we're approaching the other person.
Yeah.
I guess.
So that's one end of the perspective. They're voicing it out. But how about those people who doesn't want to say something? Like, as you were saying, put them under the rug. So how do you actually convince them to, like, it's okay?
Yeah, I mean, it's slow going. It can be, right? So if your partner is somebody that does tend to avoid or try to minimize things, I think it's important to really understand why they have that coping style, right? Was that adaptive for them growing up in their family? Did they feel like that was how they survived historically, right? So before you just kind of go in and try to make somebody talk or make them change or be someone they're not, I think it's important to understand, well, why are they the way they are, right? To begin with, like what happened to them rather than what's wrong with them is an important distinction. But I would say, to your point, gentle kind of coaxing, like I really am interested in you, I care about you, I want to get to know you, I know this is hard, let's take it slow, right? Can you sit next to me and hold my hand and, put your arm around me and acknowledge that something hard just happened and that's it for now, right? So sort of baby steps,
Yeah.
right? It's not everybody's ready to rush into couples therapy and talk about their childhood. I mean, I think that's a nice place to get to, but baby steps are okay too.
Yeah, I like that because, like, some people are actually also introverts, right? Like, they don't want to be, like,
Yeah.
expressing so much
sure.
and sharing their, thoughts.
Right. And I think that's a nice point, right? That people are generally, not everybody is well suited to being so vulnerable right away, right? It takes some trust and safety to get there. So it is about, in a new relationship, not expecting that the other person might be vulnerable and share everything right away, that maybe they need a little bit of time to develop trust, to get there. I mean, it's actually not a great idea to be too vulnerable too early on, right? If you put everything out there and then you only go on a couple dates, you're left kind of feeling depleted, right? I gave so much, I didn't end up getting or receiving, and now I'm left feeling kind of like this is a pattern. I hear my clients say that quite a bit, right? That it can be exhausting to date in part because of maybe how much they're giving early on.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I like it because, like, imagine like some people, like, they expect usually the girl is the woman is always the one who's talking and then, like, the guys doesn't want to have to, the chance to open up because they're concerned about their, being safe.
Yes, right.
Oh,
And right, we see that dynamic a lot, that maybe men aren't necessarily socialized to be more vulnerable, right? There's this whole concept of toxic masculinity where you're supposed to kind of be strong, which has historically meant like not vulnerable, not show how you're feeling, be able to kind of be the superhero for everybody. It's really damaging for boys and young men. And we talk a lot about the ways that women, are harmed by their socialization, which is also true. But it also is important to think about, right, what messages have men gotten that have really limited and confined their emotional world, right? And so I think I would say, if a young woman was approaching a young man and going out on a date, it's not so much is he able to talk about everything right away and be super vulnerable right away, but does he seem to have an interest? Does he seem to listen to you when you're vulnerable? Does he seem to respond in a way that's kind and empathic, right? That sort of lays the groundwork for, okay, we can get deeper over time. We can develop trust so that he feels like, okay, I can show you who I really am over time.
And then, what do you recommend to couples in a relationship when intimacy is fading?
Yeah, we hear that a lot too, and it's not uncommon. And so basically right away I tell folks not to panic, right? Sometimes this can be like, oh no, run out and look on social media and see, are other people experiencing this problem too, right? And the truth is, if they look around, yes, right? This is a common issue that couples can face, intimacy, ebbs and flows, and that's okay. So I encourage couples to not get too judgmental about it and about themselves or about the other person, but rather get curious. What is it that helps us feel connected? What feels intimate to you or to me, right? I've had some couples say, when he brings me a cup of coffee in the morning, that feels like an act of intimacy, right? Or when I recognize something about him and how he's contributing to the household or something nice he did for me, that helps us feel closer. So I think intimacy can mean a lot of different things. So I think it's important to start thinking about maybe not just physical intimacy, which is important, but also what are sort of the pieces that help us feel more connected to each other, and what's happened to get in the way of maybe why we haven't been as attentive to one another and doing those things that make each other feel loved and cared for. So it's a conversation with curiosity and patience, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I also, understand some situations wherein, the man is the one who's having a problem. It's not just always the woman who's always having the problem, but also sometimes, the physical condition of the man, they're having some problems. So I like the idea that, you can actually share your intimacy in other forms, not just the physical part.
Yeah, I think sometimes people do get a little too focused on that kind of physical intimacy as being the only kind or the most important kind, and then sort of maybe feel shame or embarrassment if that isn't happening the way they think it should. And so then I often see folks kind of distance completely versus okay, well, this is something to work on, and right, what are some other ways that we can also connect and enjoy one another?
Yeah, I have had some guests wherein they said that sex is one of the common reasons why people divorce, and so apparently some. It's not really the major one. That's what I heard. It's actually the financial part. But but some people just to say oh, sex is not good. That's the reason why.
Right. Well, I've seen that too, Lori, and heard that sex and money seem to be the topics that lead to the most conflict. I think they're the hardest to talk about in some ways because they both involve quite a bit of vulnerability, right? How you choose to think about and share your body, right? What your choices are about financial resources. These are not easy topics, right? So it's easy to understand that they could be real sources of tension in a relationship.
Yeah. So this is sad, but when is it time to actually give up and leave your relationship?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think certainly, I'll just say this right off the bat, if there's any kind of abuse, right, that feels very clear. So abuse can be physical or emotional or verbal. Essentially, if you feel that your partner is part of an environment or creating an environment where you feel less than, when you feel demoralized or diminished in any way, then that's certainly a sign, right? Relationships are hard. They're a lot of work, as we're talking about. But at the end of the day, you should feel that the relationship helps you feel good about yourself, right? Not takes away from who you are, but rather adds to you. I would also go back to what I said earlier in the beginning about this idea of if there's criticism or contempt, right? It's possible to address those in therapy, and there are ways to get at that if both, partners are willing. But again, it's also an indicator that maybe the relationship isn't going to last or shouldn't last, actually.
Yeah. So it's actually some points for all those singles out there. And look before you actually leap, before you, decide, is this guy for you? Think about, how are they with regards to the pointers that you have mentioned?
Yeah, right. How do they talk to you? Again, how do they talk to others in their lives? Right. Those first few dates, I feel well, you're the expert in this, Lori, so you can tell me. But I always feel like those first few dates are really an interview in some ways, right? And I always tell my clients, be that, any gender, it's not about whether they like you. It's about how you feel about them. Do you feel safe with them? Do you feel interested? Do you feel admired? Do you feel cared about? Appropriate for that stage in the dating relationship. But yeah, and so some of these things take a while to kind of flesh out and really learn. So it is, it is important to be careful.
Well, I hope that we have more time, but actually, it was a pleasure having you here, Doctor.
Thank you.
And Like if you are a professional in love, dating, and relationships, we want to have you in the show because, like, you know, there are a lot of people who need your help, and this is one medium that we can actually express our, you know, help and consideration in giving whatever is out there that we have learned to the people who are needing our support and advice and whatever have you. And if you are actually, you know, listening and you are one of those who have been successful in your relationships, we want to also have you over here. We want to find out what are your secrets that you have had, you know, that maybe you want to share with us. I remember there was one time that, you know, there was a guest over here who was matured guy, and so, like, you know, he was sharing his you know, whatever worked for him. So yeah, we want to have those kind of situations over here shared. So I really appreciate your time, doctor, and so I'll see you again. You take care, and
Sounds
bye-bye.